On a quiet Saturday in Oklahoma, a husband was shot dead in his garage. His wife said it was a robbery, but days earlier, he'd accused her of trying to kill him and changed his life insurance policy. So what really happened that morning? And why was his Bible teacher wife on the run in Mexico? But that's not where this story begins. To understand what happened that morning, you have to go back to a marriage unraveling behind stained glass windows and Sunday smiles. I spent weeks combing through court records, church rosters, insurance paperwork, and transcripts from the trial. I talked to investigators, prosecutors, even former members of the same Bible study group. And the picture that emerged was far from what the community thought they knew. Brenda Andrew wasn't just a wife or mother. She was a woman who played her role with precision. The perfect church-going spouse, the smiling parent at school functions, the one organizing bake sales and prayer groups. And yet behind closed doors, that smile was cracking. Friends described her as restless. Her eyes wandered. Her attention drifted. And when the family moved from Texas to Oklahoma for Rob's job, something inside Brenda changed. In Texas, she'd found a rhythm. The kids were settled, her social circle was strong, and she had space. Oklahoma felt smaller. The air was tighter. Rob's work in the tech field took up more of his time, and Brenda, despite her image as a dutiful wife, was quietly pulling away. By 1997, she was already in her first affair with the husband of a friend. She began dressing differently. Nothing scandalous, just sharper, brighter, more deliberate. It was the kind of shift people notice but don't comment on, at least not in church. That affair fizzled by 1998, but the emotional pattern had been set. She stayed with Rob, yes, but the door to betrayal was open, and it never really closed again. By 1999, another relationship had taken root. This one lasted longer, nearly 2 years. Brenda played both lives at once. The mother, the wife, the teacher of Christian values, and the woman in someone else's bed. Still, Rob didn't leave. He was, by all accounts, mild-mannered, logical, and conflict-avoidant. He worked. He provided. And maybe, just maybe, he hoped it would pass. It didn't. The real turn came in 2001, the year James Pavitt entered their lives. That name would later be plastered across headlines, spoken in courtroom gasps, and etched into death row documents. But at first, he was just a clean-cut insurance salesman. You could say James Pavitt walked into Brenda's life wearing two faces, and she recognized both of them. On Sundays, he was Brother Pavitt, mild, respectful, scripturally sound. He spoke with conviction but never force. He taught in soft tones about faith, marriage, and sacrifice. People liked him, trusted him. And so when Rob and Brenda Andrew invited him into their financial planning, no one blinked. James sold life insurance. After all, he was just doing his job. But somewhere between premiums and prayer circles, James became more than a financial advisor. He became a confidant, a partner, and, eventually, something darker. They met often. First it was just paperwork, a coffee, maybe a shared lunch after Bible study. But the connection was fast and bold, too bold. They both had spouses, children, reputations in a tightly knit church community. But rules never held much weight for Brenda once she'd made up her mind. And James, for all his talk of morality, didn't hesitate to follow her lead. By the summer of 2001, Rob had become suspicious. And rightfully so. Brenda and James weren't subtle. Their body language shifted. Their schedules suddenly aligned. They smiled longer than usual at each other's jokes. Church friends noticed the chemistry and whispered behind hymnals. The elders brought it up. Soon, both Brenda and James were removed from their church positions, quietly, without scandal, but unmistakably. Rather than bring them shame, the consequences seemed to bond them tighter. James filed for divorce from his wife that same summer. Brenda followed suit, filing papers to separate from Rob after more than a decade of marriage. From the outside, it looked like a messy but ordinary collapse of a marriage. From the inside, it was the start of something sinister. What struck me while reading through old testimony and hearing from people who were there is this: Brenda didn't seem to grieve the loss of her marriage. She didn't hesitate or waver. Once she locked eyes with James and seen the way he looked at her, not as a mother or church leader, but as someone bold, dangerous even, she leaned in. It was as if the life she'd been pretending to live all those years had finally come to an end. And there was something else that tied them together: the policy. James had helped Rob secure a hefty life insurance payout, $800,000. Brenda was named as the sole beneficiary. At the time, it seemed like standard preparation. A responsible father making sure his wife and kids would be protected if anything happened. But after Brenda filed for divorce, that document started to look more like a loaded gun. I found the insurance paperwork. Signed. Filed. Neat. There was nothing sloppy about it. That's what haunts me. This wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, logged, and sealed with the click of a pen. By September 2001, Brenda and James were openly involved. Brenda was still living in the house with Rob, but they were like ghosts passing in the hallway. The kids were caught in the middle. And James, now living separately, was calling, visiting, showing up like a shadow just behind the scenes. That's when Rob made a chilling discovery. One morning, he got into his car and something didn't feel right. The brakes were spongy, loose. He pulled over, inspected underneath, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Signs of tampering. The brake lines had been cut. He went straight to the police. He didn't have proof, but he had a theory. He believed Brenda and James were behind it. He told a friend. He told investigators. And then, the smartest thing he did, he changed his life insurance policy. He removed Brenda as the beneficiary. That decision likely saved his children's financial future. But it didn't save his life. Because Brenda and James weren't about to walk away. Their plan hadn't worked, but they were just getting started. What came next wasn't quiet. It wasn't clever. It was loud, messy, and fatal. And it would happen just weeks later, in that same garage. On November 20th, 2001, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, Rob came by the house to pick up his children for the weekend. That was the arrangement during the divorce proceedings, shared custody, alternating holidays. Brenda had asked him to come through the garage. Said the front door wasn't working right. Said she'd meet him there. Rob entered the garage sometime after 10 a.m. According to what investigators would later piece together, James Pavitt was already waiting. Armed. Ready. There was no sign of a struggle. Rob was ambushed. Shot once in the chest. He collapsed, then was shot again, execution style, to the head. He died instantly. Minutes later, Brenda appeared, bleeding from a minor wound to her arm. She called 911. Her story? Two masked intruders had burst into the garage as she and Rob were saying goodbye. One shot Rob. The other turned the gun on her, but she fought back. She said they ran off into the neighborhood. She couldn't describe them clearly. Everything had happened so fast. Paramedics took her to the hospital. Police taped off the house. And then the questions began. For starters, Brenda's wound didn't match the violence of her story. It was shallow, a clean graze, more like a scratch than a gunshot. Doctors noted the angle and depth and quietly flagged it to law enforcement. It didn't add up. Then came the crime scene. There was no forced entry, nothing stolen, no footprints, no evidence of anyone fleeing. The only people seen that morning going into the garage were Rob Andrew and Brenda. As detectives dug deeper, the contradictions piled up. Brenda claimed panic, but her voice on the 911 call was strangely calm. She said she was too traumatized to talk, but then spoke at length to reporters hours after being released from the hospital. She refused to let police search her phone. She delayed handing over her clothes. And when asked about James Pavitt, she deflected, saying they hadn't spoken in days. Except they had. Phone records would later show multiple calls, texts, and voicemails between them in the days leading up to Rob's murder. They hadn't been quiet, they'd been coordinating. And then came the detail that changed everything. A neighbor told detectives he'd seen a dark-colored car idling across the street that morning, a car matching James Pavitt's make and model. He thought it was odd. Why would James be there when Rob was supposed to come by? Investigators began to circle in. But by the time they were ready to bring Brenda and James in for questioning, both were gone. Vanished. It would take weeks and a desperate, crumbling trail to find them. But already, police were shifting from questions to conclusions. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was murder by design. By the end of that weekend, Brenda Andrew was no longer just a grieving wife. She was a person of interest in a homicide. The first break in the case didn't come from a dramatic confession or a found weapon. It came from paperwork. Rob Andrew's life insurance file was precise, well-dated, and impossible to ignore. It showed that just days before his murder, he had formally removed Brenda as the sole beneficiary and had instead designated a trust for his children. He hadn't told Brenda, but he had acted fast after the brake line incident, because deep down, he knew someone was coming for him. The insurance company flagged the change as routine, But when Rob died so suddenly and Brenda still tried to file a claim for the $800,000, it triggered immediate scrutiny. Investigators now had motive, and a financial one at that. But that wasn't all. Forensic analysis at the crime scene was damning. The trajectory of the bullets didn't match Brenda's version of the story. Rob had been shot at close range, first in the torso, then again while on the ground. There were no defensive wounds. No signs of a scuffle. No signs of a chaotic robbery. Just clean, deliberate execution. As for Brenda's injury, the graze on her arm was determined to have come from a near-contact shot, too clean, too shallow. One medical expert even noted it could have been self-inflicted or done by someone intentionally trying to create a believable wound without doing real damage. A fake injury, staged for sympathy. Detectives pulled her phone records and quickly confirmed what they'd suspected. Brenda and James had been in constant contact, calls, messages, meetings, in the days before and after the murder. She had lied when she claimed they hadn't spoken. But the most chilling evidence came from Brenda's own journal. Found hidden in her home after she fled, it contained handwritten pages, some benign, others haunting. She had scribbled about betrayal, about freedom, about starting over. On one page, she'd written, "I don't want to hurt him. I just want him gone." That line would later be read aloud in court. The prosecution's case was building itself. But while law enforcement scrambled to issue arrest warrants and alert the press, Brenda and James had already crossed the border into Mexico. They were no longer suspects. They were fugitives. For weeks, authorities tracked dead ends. There were reports of them staying in motels under false names, of Brenda dyeing her hair, of James posing as a missionary. But leads dried up fast. Meanwhile, back in Oklahoma City, Rob Andrew was buried beneath a modest headstone. His children, now without a father, were being raised by relatives. The community that had once seen Brenda as a pillar of grace and morality now whispered her name with disgust. Church friends turned their backs. Former neighbors closed their doors. And the Sunday school teacher who once quoted Proverbs was now a wanted killer, hiding somewhere in Mexico, waiting for a miracle. But miracles weren't coming. Only justice. For a while, it worked. Brenda Andrew and James Pavitt slipped out of Oklahoma, crossed into Texas, and from there, Mexico. No passport stamps. No airport cameras. Just open roads, fake names, and a handful of stolen minutes between one life and another. But no one escapes clean. Not from murder. They weren't glamorous fugitives. This wasn't some romantic Bonnie and Clyde fantasy. The reports I reviewed from U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities painted a different picture. Brenda and James were broke, jittery, and constantly moving. Motel to motel. Town to town. Eating cheap meals. Sleeping with the lights on. Watching every mirror. It didn't take long for the guilt or the paranoia to set in. They reached Monterrey first, then Mexico City. In public, Brenda posed as a teacher looking for work. James claimed to be on a religious mission, passing out pamphlets and trying to blend into expat Christian communities. It might have worked, if not for one thing. They needed money. And they didn't have any. Rob's life insurance was off the table. Brenda had been removed as beneficiary. There were no secret savings. No offshore accounts. All they had were the clothes in their bags and a small stash of cash they'd brought with them. When that ran out, desperation took over. James called his daughter in Texas. He begged for help. Told her he needed cash, urgently. Didn't say why. She hadn't heard from him in weeks. The voice on the other end didn't sound like her father. It sounded panicked. She called the FBI. That was the crack in the wall. Federal agents traced the call to a pay phone just outside Saltillo. Days later, another call came from Brenda. This one was shorter. She didn't say much, just asked if there was anything left that could be sent. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. It wasn't just money they were running out of. It was time. By early December 2001, posters with their faces were everywhere, from Oklahoma news stations to Mexican border checkpoints. Their names were on international watch lists. The U.S. State Department was involved. And back in Oklahoma, the case had reached national attention. The Preacher and the Widow, one headline read, "Church lovers wanted for murder." Eventually, they tried to cross back. It's unclear exactly why. Maybe they thought the heat had cooled. Maybe they hoped to hide in a less visible part of Texas. Or maybe they were just too exhausted to keep running. On December 26, 2001, the day after Christmas, Brenda and James were arrested just outside El Paso. No gunfire. No dramatic standoff. Just two sunburned fugitives in a beat-up car, trying to re-enter the country they'd tried to escape. Brenda told officers she was innocent, that she was afraid, that she ran because she didn't think anyone would believe her. She stuck to her story, the masked intruders, the random violence, the perfect lie. But it was already too late. They were held in Texas for months while Oklahoma prosecutors worked through the extradition process. And when they finally stepped back into Oklahoma City in early 2002, it wasn't as husband and wife. It wasn't as lovers. It wasn't even as partners. It was as co-defendants in a capital murder trial. They looked different now. Older, thinner, tired. The couple that had once smiled across Bible study tables now sat at opposite ends of a courtroom, avoiding each other's gaze. The trial was about to begin, and no amount of scripture, seduction, or smooth talking would save them now. The courtroom in Oklahoma County was packed. Reporters, churchgoers, neighbors, strangers. Everyone wanted a seat. Everyone wanted to see the woman who once handed out Sunday school flyers now sitting behind a wall of armed deputies, accused of orchestrating her husband's murder. Brenda Andrew wore a cream-colored blouse on the first day of trial. Her hair was neat, her expression flat. No tears, no emotion, just quiet detachment. James Pavitt sat a few chairs away, stiff and unsmiling. Their body language said it all. The partnership had ended. The prosecution opened with what they called a calculated and cold-blooded plot for profit. They laid it out with methodical precision. The brake-line sabotage, the forged alibi, the shallow wounds, the phone records, the insurance money, all of it leading to one conclusion. Brenda wanted Rob dead, and James was willing to pull the trigger. The jury heard the 911 call. They saw photos from the garage, Rob's lifeless body, the blood pool, the gunshot wounds. They read from Brenda's journal, saw texts from James, listened to testimony from church members, co-workers, family friends. It all painted the same picture. Two people, driven by lust and greed, willing to destroy anyone in their way. The defense tried to shift the narrative. They claimed Brenda had no idea James would kill Rob, that she was caught in something beyond her control, that her injuries were real, that she ran because she was afraid. But the evidence overwhelmed the excuses. Brenda hadn't just looked the other way. She'd planned the whole thing. She'd lured Rob into the garage. She'd made sure James was waiting. She'd lied to police, then run to Mexico, hoping to start fresh with the life insurance payout and the man who murdered her husband. And the jury saw through every word. In July 2004, Brenda Andrew was convicted of first-degree murder. So was James Pavitt. Both were sentenced to death. But it didn't end there. While James was transferred to Oklahoma's death row for men, Brenda was moved to the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center, the only maximum security prison for women in the state. There, she became something unique, something singular. Brenda Andrew, once a wife, mother, and church leader, became the only woman on death row in Oklahoma. And she still is. Years have passed. Appeals have come and gone. Legal teams have changed. Activists have called the case controversial, citing flaws in procedure and questions about fairness. But the core facts haven't changed. Rob Andrew is still dead. Brenda and James still orchestrated the plan. And somewhere behind the walls of that prison, Brenda still wakes up every morning knowing exactly what she did and knowing what's coming. I visited the prison once, just from the outside. There's nothing remarkable about it. Concrete, fences, razor wire. But somewhere behind those walls is a woman who once stood in front of a church and told others how to live. And now she waits to die in the Bible Belt in silence, with the weight of every lie pressing down. The final chapter hasn't been written, but it's coming. And this time, she won't get to write it.